The hiss of the wind is the first thing you really notice. Not on the ground, where it's just a breeze rustling through the dry corn stalks left over from last season's harvest. Up here, 300 feet above the flat, sprawling checkerboard of rural Nebraska, the wind has a voice. It's a constant, low roar that snakes through the steel lattice of the tower, a sound that has become the soundtrack to my life. My name is Leo, and this is my office. Most people think I'm crazy. My ex-wife certainly did. Why would anyone choose to hang from a metal stick for a living, she'd ask, her voice a mix of genuine concern and exasperation. I never had a good answer for her, not one she'd understand anyway. It's not about the thrill, not really. It's about the quiet. The solitude. Up here, the world's noise fades away, replaced by the wind and the rhythmic clank of my own gear. There's a purity to it, a simplicity. It's just you, the tower, and the task at hand. One mistake is all it takes, so you can't afford to think about unpaid bills or arguments from last night. You have to be present. For me, that's a kind of peace. This particular tower, KSN 3B, was an old friend. A rust-streaked, 450-foot guide mast that had been broadcasting farm reports and country music since before I was born. My job today was routine: inspect and tighten the flange bolts on the upper microwave dish array and replace a faulty beacon light. Simple stuff. I'd done my ground checks, informed dispatch of my ascent, and started the long climb, just as the sun began to burn off the morning haze. The climb is a meditation. The rough grip of the ladder rungs under my gloves, the rhythmic clip-on-clip of my twin lanyards as I move from one section of the safety cable to the next. It's a physical conversation with the structure. You learn its groans, the way it sways almost imperceptibly in a strong gust. Around 150 feet, the ground loses its detail. Cars on the distant county road become metallic specks. At 250, the world below is a map of greens and browns, bisected by impossibly straight lines of dirt roads. I reached the main platform at 300 feet, the wind whipping harder now, tugging at the loose material of my canvas jacket. I locked myself in, my harness taking my weight as I leaned back, suspended over a terrifying amount of nothing. The view was magnificent. An endless sea of land under a vast, pale blue sky. Miles to the east, I could see the cluster of grain elevators that marked the town of O'Fallon. And about a half mile to the west stood KSN 3A, the sister tower to this one. It was decommissioned years ago, a skeletal relic left to the mercy of the elements. No lights, no antennas, no reason for anyone to ever climb it again. It was just there. A silent monument to obsolete technology. I got to work. I pulled out my torque wrench, its heavy, satisfying weight familiar in my hand. I moved along the platform, testing each bolt. Click. Secure. Move. Click. Secure. The movements were automatic, honed by a decade of repetition. My mind was focused, but calm. This was my element. I was halfway through the bolt check when a flicker of movement caught my eye. Peripheral vision is a funny thing up here, you learn to trust it. It's usually a hawk gliding on the thermals or a piece of debris caught in the wind. I paused, squinting against the glare, and scanned the horizon. Nothing. Just the endless blue and the skeleton of 3A against it. I shook my head, blaming a glint of sun off the old steel, and went back to my wrench. Click. Secure. Move, and there it was again. Not a flicker this time. Something definite. I stopped cold, my hand frozen on the wrench. I slowly, deliberately, turned my head toward the decommissioned tower. My heart, usually a steady drum against my ribs, gave a hard, sudden thump. There, on the old, unused tower, at the exact same height as me, was a person. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a strange shadow. It was a human figure, standing perfectly still on a narrow crossbeam. My mind raced, trying to process the impossible sight. There was no gear. No harness, no helmet, no safety lines tethering them to the steel. They were just, standing there, dressed in what looked like dark, everyday clothes, facing away from me, toward the setting sun. My first thought was that it was another climber. But that was impossible. The company's safety protocols are ironclad. You never climb alone, and you certainly never climb a decommissioned tower. We would have seen their truck. Dispatch would have notified me of any other crews in the area. There was no activity, no reason for anyone to be up there. Especially not like that. I fumbled for the binoculars hanging from my neck, my fingers suddenly clumsy and numb. I raised them to my eyes, trying to steady my hands against the buffeting wind. The image swam into focus. It was a man. Or at least, the shape of a man. His back was to me. He wore a simple dark jacket and jeans. No identifying marks. His posture was unnervingly casual, as if he were standing on a street corner waiting for a bus, not balanced on a 6-inch steel beam 300 feet in the air. He didn't move. Not a twitch. He just stood there, a silent, impossible silhouette against the vast, empty sky. A cold dread, colder than any wind, washed over me. This wasn't right. Every instinct, every ounce of experience I had, was screaming at me that this was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Who was he? And how in God's name did he get up there? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, deep hum of the wind. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Every instinct, every hour of training, screamed that this was wrong. You don't find people standing on decommissioned towers 300 feet in the air. It just doesn't happen. My mind, a machine trained for logic and process, was short-circuiting. My first, raw instinct was to shout. I cupped my hands around my mouth, turning my face toward the distant figure. Hey! The word was ripped from my throat by the wind, a thin, pathetic sound swallowed by the immense, indifferent sky. Hey! Are you all right? It was useless. The half-mile distance and the ceaseless Nebraska wind acted as a soundproof wall. The figure didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge my existence in any way. He just stood there, a dark, vertical slash against the pale blue canvas of the horizon. He might as well have been a statue. But statues don't have jackets that flutter in the breeze. Panic began to curdle into a cold, professional dread. This wasn't just strange, it was critically dangerous. One misstep, one sudden gust of wind stronger than the rest, and that man would be gone. My responsibility, drilled into me by years of safety meetings and procedural manuals, was clear. I had to report it. My fingers, usually so steady on my tools, felt clumsy as I unclipped the company radio from my harness. The plastic felt cold and solid in my trembling hand, a lifeline to the sane, predictable world on the ground. I pressed the transmit button, the familiar static crackle a small comfort. Leo to base. Mark, you copy? My voice came out strained, a little breathless. A moment of static, then Mark's voice, calm and unbothered, filled my earpiece. Copy that, Leo. Everything good up there? You're making good time. I took a deep breath, trying to organize the impossible sight into a coherent report. Yeah, Mark, I'm secure at the 300-foot platform. But I've got a situation here. A situation? What kind? Equipment failure? Unexpected interference? His tone was all business, running through the standard checklist of problems. Negative, Mark. It's visual. On the old KXL tower. The decommissioned one. There was a slight pause. The KXL tower? What about it? Rusting faster than you thought? I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, then opened them again. The man was still there. He hadn't moved a muscle. There's a person on it, Mark. Standing on a crossbeam. At my altitude. 300 feet. The silence on the other end of the radio was heavier than any static. I could picture Mark in the site trailer, leaning back in his chair, a frown slowly forming on his face. Say again, Leo? You said a person? Affirmative. A man. He's wearing a jacket and jeans. No gear, Mark. No harness, no helmet, no ropes. Nothing. He's just standing there. Leo, Mark's voice was different now. Slower, more deliberate. The voice he used when a climber reported feeling dizzy or a critical bolt was sheared. Leo, that's not possible. The access ladder on KXL was torch cut at the 20-foot mark years ago. We have the report on file. There's no way up that tower for a normal person. I know that, Mark. I snapped, my frustration boiling over. I immediately regretted my tone. I'm sorry. Look, I'm looking right at him. I've got my binos on him. He's real. He's just standing on the edge of a beam like he's waiting for a bus. Another long pause. I could hear a faint rustling sound, probably Mark leaning forward, putting his elbows on his desk. All right, Leo. All right. Just stay calm. What is the individual doing? Nothing. That's the problem. He's perfectly still. Hasn't moved since I spotted him 10 minutes ago. The wind gusted, a powerful shove that made the tower groan. I instinctively tightened my grip on a support strut, my knuckles white. My lanyards held me fast, a comforting pressure against my back. Across the void, the man on the other tower didn't even seem to sway. It was unnatural. Okay, Leo. Here's what we're going to do, Mark's voice was firm, command authority returning. You are to stay put. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to climb down or approach the other tower. Your job is your tower. Is that understood? Understood, I mumbled, my eyes still locked on the figure. You maintain visual. Report any change, and I mean any change, immediately. If he moves, if he sits down, if he waves, you call me. In the meantime, I'm calling the county sheriff. This is out of our hands now. It's a civilian matter. Probably some kid doing a stupid, dangerous stunt. Sheriff. The word grounded me. Of course. This wasn't my problem to solve. It was a situation for law enforcement, for rescue personnel. My role was to be a witness. A safe, secured witness. But it didn't feel right. Every fiber of my being screamed that something was profoundly wrong. The stillness of the man was what got to me. It wasn't the calm of someone in control. It was an absolute, rigid immobility. It was the stillness of a photograph, not a person. My mind churned with possibilities. Was he frozen by fear? In some kind of catatonic state? Or was this something else entirely? Leo? You still with me? Mark's voice cut through my thoughts. Yeah, Mark. I'm here. Still no change. Copy that. Stay on the horn. Keep the channel open. I'll patch you in if the sheriff has any questions for the primary witness. Just sit tight, son. And be careful. Roger that, I said, but my throat was dry. The radio went quiet, except for the low hiss of the open channel. The sun was warm on my back, but a deep, unshakable chill had settled into my bones. I was no longer alone in my sky-high office. I had company. And for the first time in my career, the vast, empty space around me felt less like freedom and more like a trap. Time stretches and warps when you're waiting. Up here, suspended between the indifferent earth and the endless sky, each minute felt like an hour. The initial jolt of adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a cold, heavy dread that settled deep in my gut. My harness, usually a comfort, felt like a cage. My gloved hands, gripping a support strut, were starting to ache from the tension. The wind was a constant companion, a low moan that seemed to worm its way into my skull, whispering doubts. Was I seeing things? Was the altitude, the isolation, finally getting to me? I lowered my binoculars, blinking hard, the man's silhouette momentarily burned into my retinas. I looked away, forcing myself to focus on the familiar details of my own tower, the precise torque of a bolt, the rust-colored streak on a galvanized plate. It was all real. Solid. I took a deep, shuddering breath that tasted of cold metal and empty air, then raised the binoculars again. He was still there. Motionless. A dark statue against the pale blue canvas of the sky. "Leo, you still with me?" Mark's voice crackled through my headset, a welcome tether to reality. "Still here, Mark. No change." My own voice sounded strained, thin. "He hasn't moved an inch. It's like he's frozen." "Okay, son. Just hold tight. Sheriff's Department is mobilizing, but they're stretched thin today. Some pile up on the interstate. The nearest deputy is coming from Pawnee County. It's gonna be a bit." "How long is a bit?" I asked, my gaze locked on the figure. There was a pause. "Could be 30, 40 minutes. My heart sank. 40 more minutes of this. 40 more minutes of watching a man who shouldn't be there, waiting for a resolution that felt impossibly far away. "All right," Mark continued, his tone shifting. "I've got Sheriff Brody on a patched line. He wants to talk to you directly." "Leo, this is Sheriff Brody." "Go ahead, Sheriff." A new voice entered the mix. It was calm, measured, with the gravelly, no-nonsense tone of a man who'd seen his fair share of strange things out here on the plains. "Afternoon, son. Sheriff Brody here. You're the fella on the comms tower?" "Yes, sir." "Leo. Leo Schmidt." "All right, Leo." Mark filled me in. "Tell me exactly what you're seeing." I took another breath, trying to keep my report as clinical as possible, just like I would for an equipment failure. "I'm at 300 feet on the AGT tower. Approximately a quarter-mile east is the old KXL broadcast tower. There is a man standing on the superstructure at my approximate altitude. He's on an outer beam." "Can you describe him?" the sheriff asked. I raised the binoculars again, the focus while squeaking under my thumb. "He appears to be a white male. Hard to tell age from here. Maybe 30s or 40s. He's wearing dark blue jeans, a dark-colored jacket, maybe a Carhartt, looks like it. And a baseball cap. Can't make out the logo. Is he carrying anything? A bag? Any kind of equipment?" "Negative, Sheriff. Nothing. That's the problem. No harness, no ropes, no gear at all. He's just standing there." There was a longer pause on the line this time, filled only by the whisper of static and the low howl of the Nebraska wind. I could picture the sheriff in his cruiser, rubbing his temples, trying to make sense of a report that defied all logic. "Leo," Brody said, his voice laced with a careful sort of skepticism, "that tower was decommissioned over a decade ago. We had the company remove the lower access ladder section specifically to prevent this. There's no way up that thing from the ground. Are you absolutely certain about what you're seeing?" The question felt like a punch, stirring up the doubts I was trying so hard to suppress. "Sheriff, with all due respect, I climb these things for a living. I know what a person looks like at 300 feet. He's there. I'm looking right at him." "Okay, son." "Okay," Brody said, his tone softening slightly. "I believe you. We're on our way. Just stay on the line with your supervisor and keep observing. Don't try to make any contact. Don't shout, don't wave. We don't want to startle him. Understand?" "Understood," I said, the word feeling dry in my throat. The line went quiet except for Mark's occasional, "You hanging in there, Leo?" I'd give a one-word answer, my energy focused entirely on the distant figure. The sun was starting its slow descent westward, casting long shadows across the fields below. The air grew colder, the wind picking up, biting at the exposed skin on my neck. Every theory I had felt flimsy. A stuntman would have a camera. A suicidal person, maybe. But there was an unnerving stillness to him, a lack of agitation that didn't fit. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't looking down. He was just occupying the space, as if he belonged there. My mind started to drift to dark places. Maybe he was already gone. Maybe the cold and the wind had done their work, and he was just frozen in place, a grim monument. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. I decided I had to look one more time, to see if anything, absolutely anything, had changed. I lifted the heavy binoculars, my arms protesting. I found him in the circle of the lenses, the image wavering slightly with my own unsteadiness. And then he moved. It wasn't a fall. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't anything I could have anticipated. With a fluid motion that was utterly devoid of fear or hesitation, the man turned his body 90 degrees. He bent his knees. And he sat down on the I-beam. He just sat down, 300 feet in the air, on a 6-inch wide piece of steel, as casually as if he were sitting on a park bench. He let his legs dangle over the edge, swinging them slightly, one foot then the other. It was slow, deliberate, and profoundly, terrifyingly calm. I gasped, a raw, involuntary sound. My thumb mashed the transmit button on my radio. Mark. Mark, he's moving. What's he doing, Leo? Talk to me. Mark's voice was sharp, urgent. The sheriff was likely still listening. He just sat down, I stammered, the words feeling insane as I said them. He's sitting on the beam. His legs are hanging over the side. Like it's nothing. Like he's just waiting for a bus. Complete silence came from the radio. The wind howled around me, mocking my shock. I stared through the binoculars, my knuckles white. The man on the tower just sat there, swinging his feet in the vast, empty air, a picture of impossible serenity in a place where he should not exist. The distant crunch of tires on the gravel service road was the first real change in my world in what felt like an eternity. It was a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the hum of the tower. It was the sound of the ground, of the other world, reasserting itself. I leaned out slightly, my harness biting reassuringly into my waist, and peered down. A cloud of tan dust trailed a Sheridan County Sheriff's cruiser as it bumped to a stop near my truck. The wait was over, but the anxiety only coiled tighter in my stomach. A man got out of the driver's side. Even from 300 feet, he had an air of solid authority. He was broad-shouldered, with a weathered face I could imagine even if I couldn't see the details. He put on his hat, adjusted his belt, and spent a long moment just looking up, his hands shielding his eyes from the afternoon sun. This had to be Brody. My radio crackled to life, the voice now clearer, without the faint distortion of a relayed patch. Leo, this is Sheriff Brody. I'm on site. What's the subject's status? He's still here, Sheriff, I replied, my own voice sounding strained. No change. He's just sitting on the east-facing beam, looking out. Just sitting, Brody repeated, the words flat, not a question but a statement of disbelief. There was a pause. All right. Stay put. I'm going to take a look at the base of this thing. A younger deputy, who I hadn't noticed before, got out of the passenger side. While Brody moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, the deputy seemed jittery, his head on a constant swivel between my tower, the KXL tower, and his superior. They walked together towards the perimeter fence of the silent giant. I watched them, two small figures about to confirm a fact I already knew, a fact that was the entire reason my heart was hammering against my ribs. Through my binoculars, I had a front row seat to their investigation. Brody was methodical. He didn't just glance at the fence, he walked its entire length, pulling at the chain link, testing the integrity of the posts. He pointed up at the 3 rows of barbed wire coiled at the top, a silent instruction to his deputy, who scribbled in a notepad. They circled the entire compound, a slow, pointless pilgrimage. When they arrived at the tower's massive steel leg, the one where the access ladder used to begin, they stopped. I saw Brody lean in close, running a gloved hand over the thick, welded plate that covered the spot where the ladder rungs had been torched off years ago. He looked up, following the line of the tower into the sky, right to where the motionless figure sat. The deputy pointed his own flashlight up, a useless gesture in the broad daylight, the beam swallowed by the immense blue. The whole scene was a masterclass in futility. They were trying to solve a puzzle on the ground when the impossible answer was sitting in plain sight, 100 yards in the air. Another 10 minutes crawled by before Brody's voice returned to my ear. The professional brevity was gone, replaced by something else. A weary, grounded confusion that, strangely, made me feel less alone. "Leo, it's Brody again." A sigh crackled over the radio. "Well, you weren't kidding. This thing is locked up tighter than a drum. The fence is intact, no cuts. The anti-climb panels are all in place. And the first 20 feet of the ladder, it's just not there. It's a sheer face of steel. We've walked the perimeter twice. No climbing gear, no ropes, no sign of entry. Nothing." "I know, Sheriff," I said quietly. "That's what Mark and I were saying." "Yeah, well, seeing it is something else," he grumbled. "Can you give me a description of this guy again? Anything at all. What's he wearing? What does he look like?" I lifted my binoculars again, my hands steadier now. The man hadn't moved a muscle. He was just a shape, a human form in an inhuman place. Same as before. Looks like blue jeans, a dark-colored jacket or a heavy flannel shirt. Can't make out a face, the angle's wrong and he's looking away. No gear. No helmet, no harness, no bag. He's just there. Like he walked up a flight of stairs to a porch and decided to sit down. The silence on the other end of the radio was heavier this time. I could picture Brody down there, looking from the impossible base of the tower up to the impossible man, the two realities refusing to connect. The wind whistled around me, a lonely, indifferent sound. On the ground, there was now a small hub of confused activity. On the tower, there was only a profound, baffling stillness. "What's the protocol for this, Sheriff?" I asked, unable to stand the quiet. Brody's reply was stark. "Son, I've been sheriff here for 22 years. I've handled standoffs, manhunts, and enough domestic disputes to last a lifetime. There is no protocol for this. No one's ever been up there before. Not like this." He paused. "Fire and rescue can't get a ladder up this high, not even close. A state patrol helicopter is a possibility, but with this wind, the rotor wash could be dangerous for him and for you. We can't risk blowing him off that beam." Every logical solution was being stripped away, leaving only the raw, unbelievable truth of the situation. We were witnesses to something that defied easy answers. I watched as Brody walked away from the KXL tower and stood in the open space between our two structures. He looked up at me, a tiny figure so far below, and then his gaze shifted, tracking an imaginary line through the air to the other man. I knew what he was thinking before he even said it. It was the only option left. The one that made every nerve in my body scream in protest. His voice came over the radio, low and grave, stripped of all official procedure. It was just one man talking to another. "Leo. Mark is on the line with my dispatch, and we've been talking. We've run out of ground-based options. I can't get anyone up there. But you're already in the sky." I gripped the cold steel frame in front of me, my knuckles white. The wind seemed to mock his words, tugging at my clothes. "Leo, I need to ask you something I have no right to ask," Brody continued, his voice tight. "Company policy and common sense be damned. Would it be possible for you to make a traverse from your position over to that tower?" The sheriff's question hung in the air, a weight heavier than any piece of equipment I'd ever hauled up a tower. The wind, which had been a constant, impersonal force all morning, suddenly felt like a living thing, trying to rip the words from the radio and scatter them across the plains. For a few seconds, I couldn't answer. I couldn't even breathe. My mind was a frantic scramble of schematics, safety protocols, and raw, visceral fear. A tower-to-tower traverse. It wasn't something you trained for in a standard certification course. It was the stuff of legends, of emergency scenarios so improbable they were almost theoretical. You saw it in movies, but in the real world, it was a last resort of the highest order. A maneuver where the margin for error was non-existent. One miscalculation with the rope tension, one anchor point failing, one sudden gust of wind at the wrong moment, and that was it. "Leo, did you copy that?" Sheriff Brody's voice crackled again, pulling me from my paralysis. His tone was level, professional, but I could hear the undercurrent of desperation. He wouldn't ask if there was any other way. My gaze shifted from the solid, reassuring steel of my own platform across the chasm to the KXL tower. To the man. He was still sitting there, a dark silhouette against the vast, pale blue sky, legs dangling as if he were sitting on a park bench. He hadn't moved an inch. There was a horrifying stillness about him, a complete lack of self-preservation that sent a shiver down my spine unlike any cold I'd ever felt. "Mark, are you hearing this?" I managed to say, my voice raspy. My throat felt like sandpaper. "I hear it, Leo," Mark's voice came back instantly, tight with stress. "Stand by." A moment of static, then, "Sheriff, this is Mark. You're asking my guy to perform a non-standard, high-risk traverse. I can't officially authorize that. You know I can't. The liability," he trailed off, the unspoken implications filling the silence. "I'm aware, Mark," Brody replied calmly. "This isn't an order. It's a request. We have a man who is going to die, one way or another. He either falls, or he freezes to death when the sun goes down. We have no other means of reaching him. I am officially asking for assistance. The choice is Leo's." The finality of it landed in my gut like a lead weight. It was my call. My risk. My life on the line. I thought about my small apartment back in Omaha, the half-finished coffee on the counter. I thought about my sister in Kearney and the promise I'd made to visit next weekend. Normal things. Things that belonged to a world on the ground, a world that suddenly felt a million miles away. My training, my entire career, was about mitigating risk. About procedures, double checks, and triple checks. Every move was calculated. This was the opposite of that. This was a leap of faith into a hurricane of unknowns. But then I looked at the man again. He wasn't a problem to be solved or a risk to be mitigated. He was a person. A person sitting 300 feet in the air with no gear, no hope, and no way down. How did he get up there? The question hammered at my skull, but it was secondary now. The only question that mattered was the one the sheriff had asked. Could I get him down? "Mark," I said, my voice firmer now. I had to take control of the part one could control. The prevailing wind is from the northwest. If I set up the line, it'll be a crosswind. It's manageable, but not ideal. I'll need to set the anchor high on this tower and aim for a point slightly below him on KXL. Gravity assist. Silence from Mark's end. He was processing it. He knew what I was saying. I wasn't just considering it anymore, I was planning it. "Leo, you don't have to do this," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Nobody would blame you. This is beyond the pale." "I know," I said, my hand tightening on the steel beam beside me. The cold seeped through my glove, a grounding sensation. "What's his status, Sheriff? Is he responsive at all?" "Negative," Brody answered. "He hasn't acknowledged us in any way. Just sitting." That settled it. I couldn't just stand here and watch a man die. My fear was a tangible thing, a cold knot in my stomach. But my sense of duty, that ingrained part of me that climbs into the sky to fix what's broken, was stronger. This was something broken. The most broken thing I'd ever seen. "All right, Sheriff. I can do it," I said, and the words felt like they were coming from someone else. "But I'm going to need you to clear the ground below the traverse line. Completely. No one stands between these towers. Mark, I'm going to need you to talk me through the anchor points on this side. I'm using a dual point system on the main structural leg." "Copy that, Leo." Dual point anchor, Mark's voice returned, all business now. The decision was made. Now came the execution. Let's get to work. The next 20 minutes were a blur of intense, focused activity. Fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. I pushed it down, replacing it with the cold, hard logic of my training. I unpacked my emergency high-angle rope, a 200-meter static line specifically designed for this kind of load. I meticulously set up the anchors, wrapping heavy-duty straps around a load-bearing steel girder, equalizing the tension between two separate points. Each carabiner gate was twisted shut, then checked. Then checked again. Mark was my second set of eyes, watching me through the tower camera, his voice a steady presence in my ear, questioning every move, forcing me to verbalize my process. Anchor 1 set. Tension looks good, Leo. How's the strap angle? Less than 45 degrees. It's solid. I attached a pulley system. I clipped my harness into the line. I attached a secondary safety line, a prusik knot that would grip the rope if my main system failed. Everything was redundant. Everything was deliberate. As I worked, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was my world. The ropes, the knots, the gear. This I understood. Finally, it was all done. The bright yellow rope stretched out from my tower, disappearing into the air before terminating in a weighted throw bag that I'd managed to toss over a beam on the KXL tower. It wasn't a perfect anchor on his side, but it was the best I could do from this distance. It would hold. I stood on the edge of the platform, the wind whipping at my jacket. I looked down. The ground crew, Brody included, were tiny figures, staring up. They had cleared the area as requested. Then I looked across. The man hadn't moved. He was just a shape, oblivious or indifferent to the rescue operation unfolding 100 feet away. Okay, Mark. I'm clipped in. All systems are go, I said into my radio, my own breath fogging up in front of my face. Godspeed, Leo, was all he said. I took one last look at the solid platform beneath my feet, the last piece of solid ground I would feel for a while. I gripped the traverse line, my gloves squeaking on the taut rope. Then, with my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, I took a deep breath and stepped off the tower into the empty air. The step off the platform wasn't a step into nothingness. It was a step into everything. The wind, the noise, the sheer, gut-wrenching reality of the drop. For a horrifying half-second, I was falling, a weightless plunge that stole the air from my lungs. Then the rope jolted, the harness bit into my thighs and waist, and I swung violently, like a pendulum on a frantic clock. My world narrowed to three things: the abrasive texture of the rope in my gloves, the high-pitched shriek of the pulley rolling along the Tyrolean line, and the roar of the wind. It was a physical presence, a bully trying to shove me, twist me, and tear me from my lifeline. It whistled past my ears, a deafening symphony of pure, indifferent force. Status, Leo? Mark's voice crackled in my ear, a static-laced anchor to the world of reason. Moving, I grunted out, the word ripped away by the wind as soon as it left my lips. My arms screamed in protest as I began the traverse. It was a brutal, mechanical motion, one hand in front of the other, pulling my own dead weight across the chasm. The steel core of the rope felt impossibly thin against the vast emptiness below. I made the mistake of looking down. Once. The checkerboard of Nebraska farmland wasn't a peaceful patchwork quilt from up here. It was a dizzying, terrifying grid rushing up to meet me. The ground, 300 feet below, seemed to pull at my soul, a siren call promising a final, swift end to the strain and the fear. My stomach lurched. I snapped my head back up, eyes locked on the KXL tower, my destination. My knuckles were white inside my gloves. My breath came in ragged, sharp gasps. "Don't look down, son," Mark said, his tone low and steady. He knew. Of course he knew. Just focus on the other side. Hand over hand. You've done this in training a dozen times. Training was in a controlled environment, 20 feet off the ground, with a safety net and instructors shouting encouragement. This was a raw, primal struggle against gravity and my own screaming nerves. The KXL tower seemed no closer, an iron mirage in the windswept sky. The figure was still there, sitting with that same infuriating calm. A statue of resignation. Halfway across. The sag in the rope was at its greatest. My progress slowed to a crawl. Every inch was a battle. My shoulders felt like they were being torn from their sockets. Sweat dripped into my eyes, stinging, blurring my vision of the goal. The pulley's scream was my soundtrack, a metallic cry of exertion that echoed my own silent one. It was here, in the heart of the void, that I could finally see him clearly. The wind whipped his dark, thinning hair. He was older than I'd first thought, maybe late 50s or early 60s. His face was weathered, carved with the deep lines of a life lived outdoors, a farmer's face. He wore a simple flannel shirt, faded blue, and worn denim jeans. But it was his expression that held me captive. It wasn't fear. It wasn't madness. It was nothing. A profound, hollow emptiness. His gaze was fixed on the distant horizon, looking past the fields, past the highway, at something only he could see. He wasn't ignoring me. It was worse. It was as if I didn't exist. As if my desperate, muscle-shredding journey across the sky was no more significant than a cloud passing overhead. Who was this man? What sorrow could be so vast it could swallow the fear of falling from a 300-foot tower? You're past the halfway point, Leo. It's uphill from here. Dig in, Mark coached, his voice a lifeline of sanity. He was right. The rope now angled upwards towards the KXL tower. The pulling became harder, a deadlift with my entire body weight. My muscles burned with a clean, acidic fire. A part of my brain, the cold, professional part, took over. It counted pulls. It measured breaths. It ignored the burn. It shut out the fear. 1, 2, 3. The steel latticework of the tower grew larger, resolving from a cross-hatched pattern into individual beams of rust-colored metal. 20 feet away. I could hear the hum of the wind through the tower's structure now, a different key from the open-air howl. 10 feet. I could see the texture of the rust on the beam he was sitting on. He still hadn't looked at me. With a final, desperate heave, I was there. My boots clanged against a horizontal support beam, the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The shock of solid steel under my feet was so profound, so welcome, that my legs nearly buckled in relief. I clung to the tower's frame, my chest heaving, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I'm on the KXL. I'm secure, I gasped into the radio, my voice hoarse. Copy that, Leo. Good work. Stand by, Mark's reply was clipped, professional, but I could hear the immense relief beneath it. My fingers, clumsy and trembling, worked the carabiners. I detached the pulley from the traverse line and clipped my primary safety lanyards to the tower. The empty line swayed back towards my tower, a silent testament to the journey. I took a full minute, my forehead pressed against the cold steel, just breathing. In and out. The wind was still a menace, but here, anchored to the structure, it was manageable. I was safe. Finally, I gathered myself. I pushed off the beam, turned, and stood on the narrow platform. He was less than 10 feet away, sitting on the main beam that jutted out into space. The void was on 3 sides of him. For the first time since I'd spotted him, the man moved. He didn't stand or flinch. He simply, slowly, turned his head. His empty eyes, the color of a washed-out sky, met mine. The silence between us was heavier than the air, more terrifying than the fall. The rusted steel groaned under my boots as I clipped my final lanyard onto a structural beam, the metallic click a small, definitive sound against the wind's relentless symphony. I was on his tower now. Just feet away, the man finally turned his head, his movement slow, as if moving through water. The wind whipped his graying hair across his face, but it couldn't hide the profound emptiness in his eyes. They weren't panicked or defiant, they were vacant, gazing at a horizon only he could see. My heart was still a frantic drum against my ribs, the adrenaline from the traverse slow to recede. I unclipped the rope from my harness, the connection to my own tower severed. We were two souls marooned on an island in the sky. Forcing my breathing to steady, I spoke, my voice rough, nearly stolen by the wind. "Quite a view from up here." He didn't respond. He just stared, his gaze shifting from me to the vast, patchwork quilt of Nebraska farmland below. He wore a simple flannel shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed work boots, clothes for the ground, not for the sky. His hands were raw, chapped red by the cold and the climb. I knew pushing him would be a mistake. Panic was a fragile thing, a sheet of thin ice over a deep, cold lake. I couldn't afford to break it. I decided to treat this like any other part of my job, methodically, calmly. "My name's Leo," I said, keeping my voice even. "I work on that other tower. Saw you from over there." I gestured with my chin, not wanting to make any sudden moves. "Gets pretty cold this high up, doesn't it?" Slowly, his eyes focused on me. It was like watching a light flicker to life in a distant, abandoned house. A flicker of awareness. He blinked, and his lips parted. A dry, rasping sound emerged. "Eleanor," she always loved the sky. The name hung in the air between us, a fragile ghost. Grief. I recognized it instantly. It was the same hollowed-out look I'd seen in my own father's eyes after my mother passed. It was a weight that bent a person's entire world out of shape. "Eleanor," I repeated softly, acknowledging the name. "Was she your wife?" He nodded, a small, jerky movement. He looked down at his own hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. On his left ring finger, a simple gold band glinted dully. "She's gone," he whispered, the words almost lost to the gale. 2 months now. We used to sit on the porch. Every evening. We'd watch the beacon on this tower flash. He looked up, at the rusting hulk above us. "Her light," I called it. When she got sick, she couldn't go outside anymore. But I'd describe it to her. The color of the sunset behind it. The way it cut through the fog. It all clicked into place. This wasn't a stunt. It was a pilgrimage. A desperate, irrational act of mourning. I don't remember climbing," he said, his voice cracking with confusion. "I just knew I had to get closer. To her light." "I understand," I said, and the crazy thing was, I truly did. In the crushing isolation of 300 feet, his grief made a terrifying kind of sense. "But your light is down there now, waiting for you. This place, it's dangerous. Let me help you get back down." Fear finally entered his eyes, replacing the vacancy. He looked down, truly seeing the terrifying drop for the first time. A tremor ran through his body. I can't go down." "Yes, you can," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I do this every day. I'm going to help you. I have a harness right here for you. I'll be with you every single step of the way. We'll do it together." I pulled the spare harness from my bag. It was an awkward, delicate dance, helping him step into it, pulling the straps tight over his thin frame, clipping him in. His hands trembled as he held onto the beams. I secured a secondary safety line, connecting him directly to me. If he slipped, we were tethered. His fate was now physically bound to mine. "Okay," I said, looking him in the eye. His name, I learned, was Arthur. "Okay, Arthur. 3 points of contact at all times. 2 feet, 1 hand. Or 2 hands, 1 foot. Don't look down. Look at me, or look at the rung right in front of you. I've got you. I promise." The descent was the longest hour of my life. It was a painstakingly slow process, a vertical ballet of trust and terror. Every time Arthur's foot slipped, my own stomach would lurch, the safety line tugging between us. The wind was our constant tormentor, trying to pry our frozen fingers from the cold steel. "That's it, Arthur. Good. Now the left foot," I coached, my voice a steady mantra against the howl. "Just one more section. You're doing great." I could hear Sheriff Brody's anxious voice crackling on my radio, asking for updates I was too focused to give. I just keyed the mic once. "We're coming down. Slowly." As we neared the bottom, maybe 50 feet up, I could see them, Brody, a couple of deputies, and a paramedic standing by an ambulance. Beside them stood a young woman, her face a mask of anguish. His daughter, I presumed. Her presence on the ground gave my words more weight. "They're waiting for you, Arthur. She's waiting for you." When our boots finally touched the solid, blessed ground, Arthur's legs gave out. I held him up, the two of us leaning on each other, utterly spent. The paramedics rushed forward, but his daughter was there first, throwing her arms around him, her sobs echoing in the sudden quiet at the base of the tower. I stepped back, unhooking the line that connected us. My job was over. I watched as they guided Arthur, wrapped in a blanket, toward the ambulance. He paused and looked back at me, his eyes no longer vacant. They were filled with tears, but they were clear. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was more thanks than I'd ever need. Sheriff Brody walked over, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Leo. I don't know what to say. You saved his life." "Just glad I could help, Sheriff," I mumbled, already gathering my gear. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had nothing to do with the climb. I packed my ropes and carabiners into my truck, the familiar clicks and clanks a comforting ritual. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The two towers stood silhouetted against the setting sun. One was my job, a place of steel and solitude. The other was now something more, a monument to a love that reached for the sky, and a testament to the man who climbed it to say a final goodbye. The empty Nebraska highway stretched out before me, but for the first time in a long time, the solitude didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. Earned.